AMD's latest gaming CPU for AM4 looks quite compelling, and one could argue that it's a better choice over the long-praised 5800X3D. It's also kind of cool that AMD is still releasing new CPUs for this platform. However, is this new $250 CPU for their last-gen platform really worth it, or are there better alternatives out there for your money? Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel, and I hope you've all been doing well. When we started to hear rumors initially that AMD was going to release yet another X3D CPU on AM4, I was inclined to believing that it was probably false, because when you think about it, AM4 in the tech world is an ancient platform. It first appeared on the market back in 2016, so it's pretty crazy to think that 8 years later, nearly reaching a decade, we're still seeing a new release for it. So in regards to that, it's quite remarkable. Who knows, perhaps next year they may even just release a 5900X3D, you know, the prototype they showed off back in 2021 Computex. Yeah, it really feels like it wasn't that long ago where X3D tech was first unveiled, but it's already been like nearly 3 years. Time sure does fly. Anyways, on to the subject of this video, which is the Ryzen 7 5700X3D. This chip was finally unveiled to us during AMD's keynote at CES last month. It's an 8-core 16-thread Zen 3 CPU with 3D V-cache stacked on top of its CCD. Basically, it's got the same exact setup as the 5800X3D, which was already a popular CPU for AMD, except the only difference is that with this one, it's clocked slower. The 5800X3D can do about 4.5 GHz on its boost, whereas the 5700X3D does about 4.1 GHz. So we're looking at a difference of around 10% in clock speeds. And that's also probably one of the main reasons as to why this chip exists. When AMD was binning the 5800X3D, they probably had a number of chips which still function but couldn't quite make the cut for the 5800X3D. So they repurposed those dies into this one, and you know, they'll sell them for a little bit lower. Happens all the time with various SKUs and parts. Even Intel does the same with their SKUs. It's why you have better binned K unlocked SKUs versus non-K parts that aren't. In terms of pricing, the 5700X3D has been released at $249 US, and if you recall my video from December when I initially discussed the launch rumor, I said that $229 to $249 is where I think AMD is going to sell this chip, and it looks like the upper end of that guessed range is where it landed, which is a bit unfortunate to see. I think at $220 it would have looked a bit more appealing. I'm also going to get into why at $250 it can be a bit of a tough sell or something you're gonna want to give a second thought to depending on your situation. But before we talk about that, let's talk about benchmarks and numbers. Hardware Unboxed did a review recently of it and found performance across all the titles where it's pretty close to the 5800X3D. Like, you'd have a virtually identical experience, and on average we're looking at around a 5% difference, so that's actually pretty good, considering the fact that right now if you were looking at picking up a Ryzen 7 5800X3D, you're going to be paying around $300 US or a bit more. Then you might as well save the money and then get this chip instead. I've seen the 5800X3D fall below $300 on places like Amazon. You can track the price using this tool called the Camel, and they have a browser extension as well, so it's pretty helpful in letting you know if the price of an item you want is actually good or not, if you should be waiting for a sale. Now, who does this chip actually make sense for? Well, if you're currently a PC gamer on AM4, but you're using an older generation Ryzen part, like the Ryzen 5 1600 or 2600, or even something a bit newer like a Ryzen 7 3700X, and you're looking at making the most cost-effective upgrade, then this 5700X3D would be a pretty nice jump. So let's hold it there for a moment and look at this a bit more deeply. If you're someone who's on one of those older CPUs and you've also dabbled into some memory overclocking and you're running some good B-die memory, then I would argue, judging from Hardware Unboxed's own data, you can probably save even more money and then just get the 5700X. It does look like Steve is using some pretty good B-die for his test system already, but if he's just using regular stock XMP, then he's probably leaving performance on the table. So if you want to save even more money and you're okay with spending a Saturday on memory tuning, then that could potentially be a better avenue for you and give you some better value for your dollar. Though the point still stands regardless if you were using one of those older CPUs and let's say you've upgraded your GPU because you want to play more modern games that are using better visual fidelity features like ray tracing, path tracing, etc. Something like an RTX 4070 Super. then going this route will at least ensure you've got a decent CPU that won't be holding back the GPU. Like I said, it'll be a pretty easy transition for you. Simply uninstall the old chip, drop in the new one, and then you can probably sell the old one and recoup some of that cost. So if you're already on AM4, then this new X3D chip is pretty nice for an easy upgrade, and you gotta give credit where credit is due. AMD supporting the socket for this long and releasing newer options opens a lot of opportunities for the consumer. But also, if you're looking at it from a business perspective, it makes sense considering AM5 didn't kick off the way AMD had hoped it would, and there are a lot of people still on AM4 and still buying AM4 systems, which is kind of interesting. You'd think with the AM5 platform being out, most consumers looking to buy new AMD products would jump on the newer platform and still have an open upgrade path, but people are still building AM4 builds, and I guess the reason for that is because, well, it's pretty cheap compared to AM5, and also because Zen 3 and Zen 3D performance is still good enough for the vast majority of users out there. And I'll actually be making a video talking about how your CPU is starting to matter less with the way these modern games are being designed and the settings that are being pushed by the devs. And let's be real here, the benchmarks we're seeing from reviewers are sort of a perfect case scenario in which the 4090 is being used so that can minimize the GPU bottleneck. Obviously, nobody is going to be out there benchmarking a whole stack of CPUs using an RX 6600 or RTX 3060, but the people who are in this segment of the CPU market, that $200 to $300 CPU market, they're going to be buying GPUs like the 7800 XT or the 6700 XT, 4070, etc. And for those cards, the 5700 X3D is still totally fine. Now, if you're someone who's in this segment of the CPU market and you currently don't have a build, you're not using an older AM4 build or anything, then I would say you're actually better off going with Intel. More specifically, I was looking online and I found Intel's 12600KF for just $183 on Amazon. And if you recall last Black Friday, that if you were looking for a new CPU on a budget, then the best deal you could get was the 12700KF, and that was at like $189. So that was impeccable value. Really strong 8P cores and just, yeah, really good value bang for the buck. You don't necessarily need a high-end Z-series board for this chip. You can get a B660 or B760 board, and those boards still allow you to, work with DDR4, and it'll also allow you to memory tune, so you can change stuff like the IMC VDD. You can also change the system agent, so that way you can get a nice performance boost without having to necessarily OC the processor itself. But I've also seen Z690 and Z790 boards drop in the low 100s, so that gives you total control if you want to go that route. I've also still seen that you can get DDR4 Samsung BDI memory for cheap. It's going to run out, so if you were thinking about grabbing it, then just do it. Worst case scenario, you can always return it if things don't pan out the way you planned. But these Alder Lake CPUs are, man, still phenomenal. They have excellent gaming performance, better than Zen 3 and Zen 3D for the most part, in my experience. Also, don't forget, you do also get 4 more E-cores, so overall multi-threading is mostly better than an 8-core Zen 3 part, and you're also coming in at a cheaper price because RAM and mobile prices are similar, but the difference between the 12600KF and the 5700 X3D is like $60. So to me, if you're a budget gamer or you care about really good value and you don't necessarily care about upgrade paths, then the Intel platform actually makes more sense here. But speaking about upgrade paths, I don't usually recommend products based on future promises or what it could be like in the future. With AM4 being supported this long and we're getting CPUs like the 5700 X3D come out, it does set a good precedent, but that won't guarantee it's going to happen again, and that AM5 is going to get the same sort of treatment. Because let me remind you all that AMD was not inclined on letting 300 and 400 series owners even upgrade to Zen 3. It wasn't until there was a bit of backlash that they opened the door for 400 series owners, and then once Alder Lake came out, they were scared that 300 series owners would jump ship, so then they opened the pathway for them. But it wasn't until they got their teeth kicked in that they had to start backtracking. Had Intel flopped hard with Alder Lake, they would have happily told you to buy a new motherboard if you want to upgrade to Ryzen 5000 or the 5800 X3D. The good news is that if you want to go the new AM5 route, which is also an alternative if you are building new, then there's decent B650 boards out there that don't cost an arm and a leg, so it looks like prices have come down there. And of course, DDR5 isn't nearly as expensive when Ryzen 7000 first came out. All in all, I think AMD releasing the 5700 X3D is still the right move. I mean, if they can salvage the defective dies and still turn them over for some revenue, it makes sense. There's a lot of current AM4 users out there that aren't too keen on upgrading or jumping ship to AM5. Their system is still working fine for their needs, but they're still looking to get that extra bit of kick or breathe some new life into the system. I guess maybe for a GPU upgrade, they're looking at it. So this is a win-win for both AMD and the consumers. At the end of the day, it's nice to see how the CPU market has so many options for the user to choose from, and you just got to find what works best for your scenario. Alrighty guys, so that's going to do it for this one. We'll touch base in the next video. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.